Hello, welcome. Yes, I am Trisha G. I will be speaking about, I don't need to do any of that because you did everything. Great. So you're all here in the right room, listening to the right thing. I'm a lead developer advocate at Gradle, which is why I'm talking about IntelliJ. No, but I used to work for JetBrains, so I spent about 7 years talking about tips and tricks for IntelliJ IDEA. At Gradle, I do a whole bunch of stuff around developer productivity. So I thought what I would do is I would merge those two topics and do developer productivity and IntelliJ IDEA. And this way you can buy my book. That's the whole point. Okay, so let's just go straight on into a demo. Let's do a demo about learning while you're using IntelliJ IDEA. I've mixed it up. If you've seen this talk before, you will see that this is different to before. Right, and let's see if we can see the IDE. Good, this is a good start. So who's an IntelliJ IDEA user in the room? That's good. Anyone who isn't, hopefully afterwards you will be. I'm going to be using Java as my main language because that's my main language. You've probably seen when you're using IntelliJ that, and you've probably used this a whole bunch of times, you get loads of yellow, hopefully not loads of yellow in your code, unless you're using legacy code like Rachel was just talking about. And it'll have a whole bunch of suggestions, like this one says, variable integer can be replaced with pattern variable. Like, what is that and what does that do? So this is a fairly common pattern in Java, where you're going to check if it's an instance of something, and if it is an instance of something, then you're going to cast it to that thing. And you're like, why did I just have to do that? And you don't have to do that anymore. You can replace it with a pattern variable. And so IntelliJ IDEA will just do that for you. That's great. That came in Java. Anyone know which version? It's 15 something. It was after 11 and before 23. So sometime in the middle. And then the other thing that came in Java some is that I used to know all these off by heart, but I can't remember any of them. Like, who has space for that in their brain? So what does this one say? This one says, if statement can be replaced with a switch statement. So let's do that. And so we get a lovely, concise switch statement, which is new in Java 17, 15, somewhere in the teens. And so now you can do a switch on the type. So you can then do, based on this, do this. IntelliJ IDEA will do even smarter things. So if you've got a slightly more complicated set of if statements, it will also replace that with a switch. And so you have case, when. And I found this kind of helpful because I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. What's a when it's at home? And what do I do with that? So this is one of the things I really love about IntelliJ IDEA. It gives me just the right information to learn new features in Java or new patterns or new best practice ways of doing stuff in the code that I'm using when I need them. So I don't need to go and find out what happened in Java 17, 18, 19, 20. IntelliJ IDEA will just tell me, now you can do these things. Like, okay, that's great. A really good example of something that I use all the time is, let's find my example. Oh yeah, all the keyboard shortcuts are going to be at the bottom of the thing. I'm not going to call out keyboard shortcuts because that's very tedious. So I'm going to look for increment count for ID. So here's another common pattern with maps. So I have a map of IDs, which is an integer, to some sort of counter object. And so what you do is, given an ID, let's find out if there's a counter. And if there's no counter, then I have to create a counter, and then I have to put it in the map, and then I can increment the counter, whether it was there or not. Okay, so it's a common pattern, we see it all the time. And IntelliJ goes, oh, you don't really need to do that because you can replace this with a compute if absent call, which is on the map. So I go in and I go, this one tells me it's been since Java 1.8. It's been around for a while, but I think people who have been coding in Java since before 1.8 might not be aware of this particular method because we are so used to going, is my object there? No, create new object, put object in map. Don't need to do that. You just use compute if absent and tell it what to do if that counter doesn't exist. Create a new counter, put it in there. Okay, so, and then I would probably, maybe I might inline that as well. I don't know. And the last one I want to show you is, oh yeah, no, I've got two more. Person DTO. And this one will tell me that, so this is a normal Java Pojo type thing. And I press Alt-Enter, it says it can be converted to a record class. So now I have a record with first name, last name, and a date. And it's got rid of all of the getters and setters for those things, turned it into a record. It's kept the equals and toString, and I'll show you why in a minute. So when it did the refactoring, it also refactored my test for me. So now it has Let's click on this so we can see. It used to be person.dto.getFirstName, but records don't have get as part of the method name. They just say .firstName. So it's just refactored all of that for me as well, so I don't need to worry about any of that. IntelliJ just does all the right stuff. Hopefully, when I rerun my tests, they should all still pass. That's what tests are for. And then we could go in here and go, oh, right, you know what? Maybe we don't need the equals and the toString. So let's get rid of those. Let's see what happens to our test now. And it fails because my equals and toString are different. So IntelliJ IDEA did the right thing, apart from when I did that. And it did not remove the methods that it needed. It just removed the ones that could be replaced and still have everything still compiling and passing the same way it used to before. One more example. Suggest something. There we go. So this is new in Java 22. It's a preview feature, so it's not available yet. So here's an example of we're iterating over a number of orders. We're actually just going to count the number of orders. We don't care about the actual order itself. And IntelliJ says, oh, you don't need that anymore. You can just replace that with an underscore, which is new in Java 22. But it's a preview feature, so it's not available in production code just yet. What I'm trying to show with this stuff in particular is, let's get this onto the right thing. Press play. One of the things I love about IntelliJ IDEA is it does all the right things all the time, more or less. It can teach me how to use new bits of Java as and when it's available. It gives me the right information at the right time in the right place. It's context sensitive. It's right in my code in the context that I need. So I don't need to learn everything about every new feature of everything. It just teaches me enough in the right place and suggests some improvements. And I don't even need to take those improvements if that's not sensible for me, if the code isn't more readable, if it's not more helpful. However, we do need to come back to the original question. Am I productive with this? You can ask IntelliJ IDEA, how productive am I? There's a productivity tool, if you go to the help menu, productivity guide, I think it's called, and it tells you how productive you are. It tells you which keyboard shortcuts and features you use most often, and you can also flip it and see which ones you don't use. You might want to start learning some of those. And this one tells me it saved me from typing 17,000 characters, which I don't think is really all that much at the end of the day, but it saved me from writing 6 bugs a day. And so the IntelliJ IDEA can help save us writing stuff, and it also can point out where we perhaps made some mistakes and errors, and it should save us some time. However, is writing characters, is that productivity? Is a productive developer someone who writes more and writes faster? I don't know. Should we have a look at this? So what is productivity for a developer specifically? Writing more lines of code, right? Not enough people laughed at that. It is not writing lines of code. More lines of code is not necessarily more productive. I think we all know that. Good, we've got some nods. Number of Git commits. If we commit more, then clearly we're more productive, right? Good, I'm glad people are laughing at that one. That's good. I mean, obviously, if we don't commit anything, we're probably not terribly productive, but making more commits does not necessarily mean we're producing the right stuff. And fixing more bugs, that makes us more productive too, right? You know the easiest way to fix more bugs? Every developer knows this, right? You write more bugs to begin with, so you can fix more. That's how you fix this particular metric. So how do we measure productivity for developers? In the book Slow Productivity, which I'm reading at the moment, Cal Newport says, it's hard to overemphasize how unusual it is that an economic sector as large as knowledge work lacks useful standard definitions of productivity. It's not just development, it's anything which is kind of knowledgey. It's not, anything which isn't agriculture and manufacturing with an actual output. When we do thinking, when we do design, when we do development, the output, yes, we could measure lines of code, but it's not really necessarily an accurate measurement of our productivity. There's a fairly new framework, or more like a framework for creating a framework for measuring productivity called SPACE. Who's heard of SPACE? Okay, that's good, better than 0. And it's a good thing that some of you haven't heard about it, because I'm going to tell you about it. So SPACE is it's more a framework to allow you to think about how you might want to measure productivity in your organization. It suggests you measure maybe 3 or 4 metrics across 5 different dimensions. Note that I'm not saying 3 metrics from each of the 5 dimensions. Like, pick 3 dimensions and pick a metric from those dimensions. Traditionally, we've generally measured things on activity. Those are the things I was just talking about. Lines of code, Git commits, bugs fixed. These activity metrics of stuff you have done. In Slow Productivity, Cal Newport also says, as the 20th century progressed, this visible activity heuristic became the dominant way we began thinking about productivity in knowledge work. Because it's fairly easy to measure these kinds of things. It's a reasonable proxy for productivity. If I committed more code, I probably did more. I was probably more productive. And it's nice and easy to measure these things. However, in the Lean Startup, they talk about vanity metrics, which is one of my favorite things, and I think about it a lot. I must have read Lean Startup, 12, 13 years ago, and I always still think about vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are measurements that give the rosiest picture possible, but do not accurately reflect the key drivers of a business. The other important thing about vanity metrics is they're easy to measure and easy to game. So things like lines of code, bugs fixed, that kind of thing. A lot of the activity metrics kind of fall under this category, where as soon as we start measuring lines of code, we start writing more lines of code, which might be just putting lots more spaces in between the things that we're writing. Another area where organizations try to measure is around performance. And I don't mean our performance as developers, I mean the performance of the application, things like, is it high quality? You know, does it do what the users want? Do the users use it? That kind of thing. Does it perform the tasks we need it to perform? Is it meeting our goals? So that's another, arguably slightly more important, I think, metric in terms of, does the thing that we work on, does it do what it's supposed to do? However, I'm going to take a slight side step to talk about something else. Who feels busy all the time? Okay, about half of you. Who feels productive all the time? About 3 people. So you're busy all the time, but you don't feel productive. Right? You don't feel like you're producing whatever it is you're supposed to be producing. And research, this is from HBO. Research indicates that when organizations overload employees, base their incentives primarily on the amount they work, and excessively monitor their activities, productivity and efficiency actually drop. So the more you measure things like activity and performance, the less productivity you're going to get out of the people you're measuring. It just makes you feel more busy, and you end up catering for these vanity metrics. You end up being in, answering more emails more quickly, committing the fixes to the small bugs, doing the fast wins because it looks better. But you don't have the time to step back and re-architect stuff or think about the right way to solve this problem. This is how our code ends up with, by small fix after small fix, becoming like the spaghetti code, which becomes impossible to manage. So Space recognizes this, and it says we also need to be looking at satisfaction and well-being and efficiency and flow, which is much more difficult to measure, often measured with things like developer questionnaires and surveys and things. So a couple of times a year, an organization will ask you, how do you feel? Do you feel productive? Do you feel satisfied? And a lot of the answers will be, no, not really. Thanks for asking. And there's communication and collaboration, but I'm not really going to talk about that because it's less relevant for the IntelliJ IDEA piece, really. So back to a demo. Let's talk about writing code, because we're developers and that's what we like to do. So we're going to demo writing code with IntelliJ IDEA. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use some of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, favorite features to write code quickly, because I've just proved that writing code quickly is absolutely everything we do in terms of productivity. But we'll start with writing code. I'm going to write my test first because I'm a good girl. We like to do TDD around here. Who likes TDD? 4 people. Well, you should all do TDD because I said so. We should also do TDD because, that's not what I wanted to do. We should also do TDD because IntelliJ IDEA likes TDD. It makes it, if you write your tests first, you can use a lot of the features to drive out code generation without AI. Do I have my AI turned on? Probably not. We can use code generation features to generate our code more quickly. So let's create a square test. not a square test, a test for a square. And we could do the wrong keyboard shortcut. We could say, generate me a test method, and it'll generate a bare basic test method. But I know I don't want my tests to look like that. I want my tests to look like, oh my goodness. I have a custom live template which creates my tests the way I want them to be. So, should have 4 sides in a square. I'm going to use display name. I'm going to use given, when, and then because I really like to separate out those different things. So then I'm going to have a new square. And what I could do is I want to assign this to a variable. So there's a few different things I could do. Alt-Enter, which is our favorite fix-everything keyboard shortcut. And it will say, do you want to introduce a local variable? Like, yes, please, that would be great. Or I can use postfix completion, type VAR, which will do the same thing. Who knows about postfix completion? Postfix completion is my favorite underutilized feature. It allows you to just keep typing forwards and it will sort of create the code for you. Let me give you another example. So if I press dot, obviously, I can see, oh, now it's giving me all my postfix completion things. Oh, stop being so smart, stupid machine learning. So usually, you press up, and it'll give you a bunch of things which aren't methods on your object. And these are templates that you can use to wrap the thing you just wrote. So I mostly use it for things like a null check or not null check. I also use it for cast, which is quite nice because it just does all your stupid parentheses, which are supposed to be there for casts. So you can do that to do that. And then you keep typing forwards, I don't know, cast it to an object, because that's really dumb. What I normally do with variables is I normally use introduce variable. That's just what my fingers do, so I don't really think about it. But any one of those 3 options is absolutely fine. And then I can press Alt-Enter to go, why are you complaining at me? And it will create, I don't want to do that. I'm going to press F2 to go to the next error, Alt-Enter, create me a square, put it in the source root, not the test root, add it to Git, go back to my test, and it's compiling, so that's good. I do not, let's move this down. I don't want this, and I do want assert equals. I want square.getSides to have 4, and then I want to say, okay, when you type a method which is called get in Java, it says, do you want to create a method called getSides? Do you want to create a property, sides, which will give you a getter and setter, or do you want to create a read-only property, which will give you just a getter? So I'm going to do the right thing, give it a property. So now I have the basics, which is compiling. I run my test. It should fail for the right reason. Is it failing for the right reason? Yes, expected 4 was 0. I'm going to do red, green, refactor. Martin Fowler's not here, but he would be proud of me. So red, green, refactor. Then we're going to go in and we're going to fix our test. We're going to say this is 4. We're going to rerun our test. I'm going to use find action to do rerun, because I can never remember the keyboard shortcut for rerun failed tests. And reruns it, and it goes green. That's good, but that's not the end, because we still have the refactor bit of red, green, refactor. So now, what's IntelliJ telling me? It's saying, something's wrong, do something. Alt-Enter, it says you can make sides final, or you can convert it to a field, convert it to a local variable. I'm going to make it final. I like my things to be final. That's great. Or I can inline that if I want to. Go, you know what? I don't need any of these fields. It's always going to be 4. It just is. Or because magic numbers are a terrible thing, I can extract a constant and call it number of sides. I can do any of those things. Whatever is my personal preference, and you'll notice IntelliJ IDEA just keeps everything compiling and everything is green all the time, because that's its job, that's what it does. The idea is not to break something somewhere, find out everywhere where it broke and go in and fix it manually. The idea is to go to IntelliJ IDEA and say, do this thing for me, and then it will, most of the time. So, writing code. In my book, which you should all buy, please help yourselves. Well, actually, I'm going to be giving away a copy of the book at the end of the presentation, so you need to sit until the end if you want a copy of the book. There'll be a QR code on the last slide, both for links to all the resources I talk about, all the things like Space Framework, and there'll be a different QR code if you do want to win the book. So in the book, we talk about the fact IntelliJ IDEA likes to keep your code always green, always compiling. It works more effectively. We are more effective as developers when we think keyboard first instead of using the mouse, there's actually a surprising context switch to just lifting your hand off the keyboard and putting it on the mouse. That's enough to kind of break our flow. So if we can learn some of these keyboard shortcuts, it helps, like, I can't even tell you what they are, my fingers just know what to do. It helps to keep us in flow as we're working. And the always green and the keyboard first, to me, help to keep me in the flow all the time as a developer. So I'm always just thinking, what's the next thing I want to do, instead of thinking, why isn't this working and what have I broken now? Being in flow as a developer feels good. This is one of the things we're kind of aiming for. This is one of the reasons why sometimes we like to write code, right? I'm just going to have a nice problem to solve. I'm going to sit down, put my headphones on, and just like flow with it. How often do people feel like who gets to feel like they're in flow at least once a week? That's good, that's great, awesome. Not me, I didn't put my hand up. But developers get that, but developer advocates not so much. So flow feels good, and Wikipedia totally backs me up on this. Wikipedia says, flow is an innately positive experience. It is known to produce intense feelings of enjoyment. And this is one of those things that we chase as a developer. One of the things I really like about IntelliJ IDEA is it helps get me in flow. It helps me just kind of move forward and be in the state of flow when I'm writing code. For me, it's not about writing code faster, although you can see with code generation and things like that, I can write code faster. Live templates is great because I can create the shape of the test exactly the way I want it, not think about it, and just keep moving forward. So I find it really helpful for being in a state of flow. It is almost impossible to demonstrate flow on stage in front of 100 people because, no one's in flow when you're all staring at me, but I'm doing my best. And flow is one of the key metrics that we're looking at in space because flow and efficiency are a key part of what it means to be a productive developer. What I want to talk about here, though, is that the keyboard, my old boss, Dave Farley, always used to say this to me when we were talking about pairing specifically. The keyboard is not the bottleneck. As developers, it's not typing the code in, which is the thing we spend all our time doing. It's not the typing which slows us down, which is why having two developers at a single keyboard is not the bottleneck a lot of the business people think it is. Now I've mentioned pairing and TDD, I'm a bit worried I'm losing the audience here. But you should do both of those things. But the problem with writing code is that we're not constantly typing characters into the IDE. So when the IDE says, I just saved you 600 characters, you're like, yeah, but that's not really where I spent my time. I spend a lot of my time trying to understand what on earth is going on in the code, trying to figure out what's going on, and this is what Rachel's talk was about before, right, with the legacy code, and what's going on and how can we make it better. So I want to talk a little bit about the features in IntelliJ IDEA which make it a bit easier for us to understand code, which I now need to try and remember. So one of the things you might notice is that I do not use I don't use editor tabs. Shall we put the editor tabs up so we can see what they look like? Tab placement. So normally you have some tabs at the top. I don't use those because I tend to use, let's get rid of them, none. I tend to use Command E to look at my recent files so I can more easily step through them. And partly because I don't want to use the mouse to move up to the tab, and also partly because I can type. So if I want to see an interface, I just start typing interface, and it will find me any of the recent files which have the word interface in. Command E is also helpful for the tool windows that don't have shortcuts. So we do have shortcuts for the project window, for the run window, and a bunch of other stuff. But the Gradle window, for example, which is a window one often has to open to reload your Gradle projects, doesn't have a keyboard shortcut. So I go to Command E and I type Gradle, and I get my Gradle window. And you can use not that keyboard shortcut. That one to hide all your windows and get back to your editor. You can always use escape to close any window or to go back to the editor as well, which is helpful. The other really key navigation feature, these are navigation really, the other key navigation feature I use a lot of is a search everywhere. So I used to go to search for class, search for file, but you just press shift twice to open search everywhere. And then you type completion or something, your first list will show you anything from anywhere which has got the word completion in. So you can do things, this is like methods, this is files, this is settings, which you can turn on and off from here. So if I want to, I can just toggle those things from here. I don't need to open the settings window. Or I can tab across and limit it by classes, limit it by files. limit it by symbols, which includes method names. Actions, so from here, I can find any actions or settings which are to do with completion. In theory, it should show git commits, but like what IntelliJ IDEA likes to do is, what JetBrains likes to do is release a new version of IntelliJ IDEA just before I give a demo like this and break one of the features that I'm demoing. So thanks, JetBrains, that's great. And there's a full text search as well. So if you can't remember any keyboard shortcut, Shift is like your best one for being able to find anything inside your code base or being able to find any kind of setting. Navigation. So again, about understanding code, let's go to our interface. One of the things I always found when working in big enterprise code bases is you often end up coding against interfaces. So when you navigate to a declaration, it goes, oh, well, this is the interface you were looking at. I'm like, no, I actually want the implementation. So you can use navigate to implementation to find out which of these classes has an implementation. And if I call it from a test, let's see if I've got a test. So for example, if I navigate to implementation from here, it will go directly to the implementation instead of to the interface. Because quite often when you get pinged to the interface, you're like, this isn't helpful. I wanted to see the actual implementation I was using. And another keyboard shortcut which is helpful for understanding the context of where we are, I don't know if this is going to work that well from this class, is Alt F7, which will show me everywhere where a particular method is, or class or something is being used. So I can kind of figure out, okay, if I change this thing here, what am I going to impact? And it will show me the list of everything I'm going to impact. What else is there? Oh yeah, and another thing that I use a lot when I'm looking around the code base to see what's going on is I will use navigate backwards and forwards. So I don't necessarily use Command E to go back to the recent files. I'll navigate backwards because I know, oh, about 3 classes ago I was in this class, or forwards to go back to where I was before. Or you can navigate between a test and the test subject, which if you're doing TDD, that's really helpful, or doing the test phase. You're going to be navigating between the thing that you're testing and the test itself. So I use that loads as well. Particularly if you find a piece of code somewhere in the wild of your code base and you're like, oh, I wonder if this thing has a test, you can press Shift Command and T, oops, and it will say, here's a list of things which look vaguely like a test for this class, which is really helpful. Okay, I'm not going to go into all of my features for understanding code because I did a video about this for no, I don't like the video, the photo, it's nasty. I didn't shoot it. But I did a video for Dave Farley's Continuous Delivery channel where I talk about more IDE tips for this and also why we really hate reading code. Does anyone, okay, who hates reading code? Other people's code. When I said other people's code, everyone, yes. Okay, fine. Flip side, who enjoys reading code? Other people's code. Okay, I'm happy for you. All right, so we've talked about writing code, we've talked about reading code. There was a survey done in 2019 which looked at how much time developers spend doing stuff. And they found that really we only spend about 32% of our time actually writing new code or improving existing code. Who thinks they spend about 30% of their time writing code? Like no one. Okay, who thinks they spend less than 30% of their time writing code? Okay, about half of you, a third of you. Who thinks they spend more than 30% of their time writing code? Some of you don't write code at all then. None of that. I don't write code. So 32% of our time, I would say that's kind of, I mean, it's definitely true we don't spend the majority of our time writing code. I do think this is a bit misleading because it puts code maintenance separate and testing separate, and I think testing should be part of writing code. But I guess code maintenance is things like waiting for your Gradle build to run and things like that, and messing around with Kubernetes and other things, which is not writing code. And then 23% of our time in meetings. Who spends more than 23% of their time in meetings? Who's a senior, right, or tech lead, right? And that's something that I thought was really interesting in the talk before this, where we were talking about, like, if you could use an AI model to save some of that communication overhead, and you could ask the AI questions about the code, it might save some of these meetings. It's nothing to do with this presentation, but I thought it was really interesting. So the point is, we don't spend all of our time writing code or reading code. We spend a bunch of our time doing other stuff. I would say a lot of our time is spent trying desperately to find the source of a particular problem. And we know that when we fix it, it's one line of code or couple of lines of code, but you still spend 3 days trying to find exactly where that line of code is or what's wrong with it. So I'm going to do a really quick, she said, 15 minutes. I'm going to do a really quick demo of the debugger, because even though these are the simple features that I really hope that you all know about the debugger, it's always helpful, A, to get a reminder, and B, to remind yourself to tell other people how to use their debugger, because it's a really key skill for developers, and I think that we don't value it enough, to be honest. So, debugger. Let's go to my debug example. So obviously, place a breakpoint, otherwise it's really pointless trying to debug your code because it will do exactly the same thing as if you press the run button. Place a breakpoint, start the debugger. Hopefully it should stop on your breakpoint. IntelliJ IDEA will tell you stuff about the context, so you can click on that, you can drill in and have a look. For something like the square, it's a bit of a dumb example, but for our big enterprise objects, you can drill in and query what on earth is happening with this enormous object. And then you can do things like you can step into, which will step into the method that was being called. And so let's say we step over that. Again, I really like the fact that IntelliJ just annotates all of this stuff, because then I can see what the real values are. I don't have to add a whole bunch of stuff down here. It's just right in the editor next to me. But how many times have you stepped into a method, you go step, 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 ah, crap, I've just gone over the bit that I wanted, and I need to go back. Okay, here is your back button, reset frame. That will take you back to before you called this method, okay? And now you can step in again and say, okay, right, step again. So I don't have to restart my whole thing and step to the same point. So if you take nothing else out of this whole presentation, I recommend looking for this tiny invisible icon here, which is the most useful part of the debugger. Use reset frame. Okay, so we did step into, and then we can do step over, which doesn't go into it, obviously. And what's the other thing we can do? We can do evaluate expression. So evaluate expression is cool because I can put any arbitrary thing in here. I can say this dot whatever I want to do. There's probably nothing on here, really. Two-string, fine. So I can have a look. I don't have I'm in static methods, so that's kind of dumb. But I might want to do something like square. I can do square dot get something, sure, and I can see get sides. Result is 4, that's okay. But what a lot of people don't realize is you can say square dot, let's see, label. I can go directly to the field itself, and I can reset this to a different value. I can call it new label. And it will set it to new label. So I can use evaluate expression to start poking different values into my running application. This is really helpful when you're debugging, you're trying to track down a problem that you saw in production or in a CI environment, and you can't get your local environment exactly the same way. You can kind of try poking it with these values to get it vaguely where you want it to be and see what the behavior looks like. Let's see if there's something else you need to know. Oh, and the other thing that you can do is you can set a conditional breakpoint. So you can put a condition in here. So how many times have you put a breakpoint in a method that gets fired and fired and fired and fired and fired? And you're like, I need it to only fire when the label is Bob. So you say square.label equals Bob. And then it will only fire when that particular condition is met. Okay? Those are your debugger basics. There's 3 hours of video content on the JetBrains YouTube channel about amazing things you can do with the debugger, most of which look fantastic and I've never used, because really these are the basics that you need to get where you want to go. But if you're interested, have a look at that content as well. Okay. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Don't want everyone to read my email. Debugging, right. And now the next thing to do is to switch contexts. Context switching is a killer. We all know that switching context absolutely destroys our productivity, right? It's the one thing that we hate. Someone comes up to you and asks you, can I ask you a question? You mean another one? Because you've just asked me a question, and now it's too late. So we really want to avoid context switching especially when we're in flow, because when we're in flow, everything just tumbles around us and we're no longer in that state of flow. So studies show that it can take 15 to 25 minutes to regain deep focus after an interruption. Frequent switching fragments time, leaving developers unable to complete complex tasks efficiently. ChatGPT told me that, so it must be true. I've heard again and again this 20-minute cost of context switching. So I was trying to find the studies which give 20 minutes. The studies are like, have you read any academic studies? Not very easy, and they don't say the TLDR is it takes 20 minutes to switch context, because it's more complicated than that. Like sometimes it takes you 20 minutes, sometimes it just takes you a couple of minutes. The point is there is a cost associated with switching contexts. So I want to talk about the fact an IDE is an integrated development environment. If we do as much as possible inside the IDE, and I don't work for JetBrains anymore, so I'm not selling you IntelliJ IDEA, but the more that we can work inside our IDE, the less context switching we have, the more we can stay in the flow. So I want to give you a couple of examples. Sure, I've got time for a couple of examples. So, I mean, I'm going to show Maven, because I work for Gradle and I have to be fair. For example, Maven integration, we kind of take it for granted, Maven and Gradle integration. We get to see all of our dependencies in here, and it's all done. Who remembers working in the old days with Java where we had to find our dependencies on the internet and download them? Great, more than one person who's as old as me. We had to do all that stuff. We had to go and find these jars or get them from source control or whatever, and it was really difficult. Now, with a Maven project or a Gradle project, not only is Maven and Gradle doing that for you, which is marvelous, thank you very much, but the IDE understands all of this. You give the IDE a Maven or Gradle project, and it goes, oh, I know what this is, and it loads it, and it gets all the dependencies, and it finds your source code, it finds your test code. Again, in the olden days, I used to spend a lot of time like right-clicking on the source code directory saying, this is a source code directory, and telling it how to compile itself. Now the IDE just does all of that for you because it's like fully integrated. So that's Maven and Gradle. What else is there? There is, oh, version control. I do not like, I'm not going to say I don't like Git. I like Git because it saves my code for me, and it has saved my arse so many times. I don't like using Git from the command line because I'm a visual person and I don't remember some obscure set of arguments which always seem to be the wrong way round, and you get no context help. So what I like about IntelliJ IDEA is the support for version control. So I get my daft little blobby pictures so I can understand that this is a branch and this is ahead of this one and this is a different branch. And so I'll use it for things like, so I'm on this branch here, and then I have to ask myself the question, do I want to merge or rebase? I don't remember. Why don't I merge and see what happens? So I'm going to merge main into my branch. So it merges it, and I can see this lovely little dance that it's doing. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to merge that. So what I'm going to do, because I'm smart and I set myself a temporary branch, because I always mess up in Git, I'm going to reset my current branch to here. Hard reset. Never do hard resets. It's a terrible thing to do. You lose all your work. And then you're like, why was I using a version control system when I just hard reset everything? It's just not a sensible thing to do. Or I can rebase. So I can rebase onto main. And I've got this temp thing, which is in the way. So now I can see it's all in one line, and that's what I wanted, for example. So the merge versus rebase thing. So I like the Git integration in IntelliJ IDEA because it helps me personally visualize what on earth is going on. And when I've got multiple branches, I can see, especially with merging, I'm like, am I merging onto the branch, or am I merging onto main? And maybe it's just me, but I just find that not very intuitive. So IDE integration for version control. And the other thing is, which I think is undervalued, is the terminal inside IntelliJ IDEA. Who uses the terminal inside IntelliJ IDEA? Wow! Well, I can skip this entire demo. Who's using the new one, the beta new version? Okay. I was not sold on it because it's weird and it feels weird and I don't like it. But it's actually pretty helpful. So obviously you can do all the normal stuff that you can do. So, well, it's not going to do Gradle, is it? Because it's a Maven project. So I can do Maven, and it will... I didn't want to press enter. It should give me more suggestions for the next thing. So it's quite good for a command line thing, because I'm not a command line person. It tells me what I could be calling after Maven. Oh, that's quite helpful. And then the other day, I was using brew. Now I have to try and remember. Oh, look, there you go. Brew, services, start. Let's do Control R. There we go. And it will, okay, fine, because I've got a stupid thing here. Okay, cool. So I don't have to remember all that stuff because it's all there. That's the new terminal. It's really helpful like that. But the main reason I like to use the terminal inside IntelliJ IDEA is so that I don't Alt-Tab out of my IDE. Because as soon as I Alt-tab out of my IDE, I go, oh, I've got 65 unread emails. I should probably look at that. Oh, someone's pinging me on Slack. Oh, I haven't done this thing. Oh, I had this thing open, my expenses. I need this other stuff. So it's not really the computer's fault, but as soon as I Alt-tab out, even to go to the terminal, I just get bombarded with all the other crap I haven't done yet. So if I keep it all inside the IDE, I don't pay that context switch. I can stay where I am and stay focused on what I'm doing and continue to ignore Slack for another half an hour. And so this is a free book. I've got a link to it on the page at the end. And the quote from this says, developers switch tasks on average 13 times an hour and spent just about 6 minutes on a task before switching to a next one. I'm not sure what its definition of task was, but I can imagine like going, obviously like email and stuff like that, but also from building and testing, and we do a lot of context switching. It says the cost or harm of a context switch depends on several factors: the duration of the switch, the reason for the switch, and the focus on the current task that is interrupted. So the more we can stay kind of like in the zone and focused on what we're doing, the less of a cost we pay for that context switch. If you want to know more about IntelliJ IDEA features I've shown, buy my book. I don't have time to talk about AI, do I?
We have 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes, all right. So I've got a 2-minute rant about AI. So I've been using JetBrains AI Assistant. I've also used Copilot, and I use ChatGPT to write my presentations, as you saw. AI is kind of helpful as a productivity tool. It can do a whole bunch of stuff that, that's boring. But I asked it to actually write a Hello World application. It goes, well, I can give you the Hello World code, but I can't create you an IntelliJ IDEA project with AI. And that's kind of fine. So there's limitations to what it does. This year's DORA report says 75% of developers are using AI to help them to write code, which is a lot. I don't know how effective it is, but 75% of developers are using it nowadays. I sort of think of AI as a little bit like this guy. I'm really pleased about the average age of this audience. So it's just like constantly asking you questions in your face. So you're kind of writing code. This is AI Assistant. You're writing code. Do you want this? Is this what you wanted? Do you mean this? Do you want one of these? And I'm like, could you shut up? Because like, I'm trying to think here. And so I know I'm old, and I know that I know how to use my IDE the way that I want to use my IDE, and I find it quite derailing. But I do tend to find that some of the code assistants are a little bit in your face and a little bit like pairing with someone who just talks at you all the time. So I find it distracting. We have to ask ourselves when we're using a tool, any kind of productivity tool, like, does it make things easier, or is it actually just increasing my cognitive load? And so the same DORA report says 75% of developers are using AI to generate code, but like the majority of them don't trust the quality of the AI code. Well, don't. Like either think that, if we somewhat trust it, I personally feel like if you somewhat trust the quality of the code, you don't trust the quality of the code. So the code that's being generated, you're using it to generate code, and then you're reading the code and thinking about the code, testing the code, and trying to figure out, does it do what I want? And I think for a lot of experienced developers, you're like, it would have been much faster for me to just write the code. So I think your mileage may vary with something like AI. I wrote an article called the rift between junior and senior developers. I was concerned when I wrote this that senior developers would have enough context to be able to use AI effectively, and juniors just would go, okay, that's probably fine, we'll just accept it, which is probably true. But one of the other things I'm thinking about is that experienced developers probably don't necessarily want to use AI to generate code because they already know their keyboard shortcuts and their live templates, they know what they need to do. Whereas junior developers or developers working in an area where they're less experienced with the code might benefit more from using it. So if I'm going to work with JavaScript, I might use an AI tool to generate that code because I'm just not as familiar with it. It's quite good for giving us a starting block to get going. So, it depends on it depends. The answer is always it depends. It is a productivity tool. Let's not use it blindly. So the last thought I want to leave you with is, this is from an article called The Myths of Generative AI. The productivity myth suggests that anything we spend time on is up for automation. The importance and value of thinking about our work and why we do it is waved away as a distraction. So AI in particular, but tools in general, can automate a bunch of stuff. It can automate creating the code, it can automate, running the code, all of these things. It's not necessarily things like the typing of the code that was slowing us down in the first place, though. The thing which takes the time as a developer is thinking about what we do and why we do it. And so we can use tools to do a lot of the boring stuff if we want to, but it's not necessarily going to speed us up by an order of magnitude if a lot of what we've been doing is just sitting around going, I'm really trying to think about how to do this thing. But what I do think is that these tools can help do the heavy lifting and the boring stuff so that we actually are more free to do the thinking and the considering. So, in summary, this is from Kathy Sierra's Badass book, which I highly recommend everyone in the whole world reads, especially if you're a developer. Learning drains cognitive resources, but after you've learned it, the now automatic knowledge and skill is fast and effortless. Knowledge in the head trades slower learning time now for faster using time later. This is a long-winded way of me saying, learn your keyboard shortcuts for IntelliJ IDEA. Because once your fingers know what to do, then you can be thinking about what is it I'm trying to achieve and how am I going to do it, instead of thinking, where is that menu item that does that thing that I want it to do? Okay, so try and automate some of the keyboard shortcuts, like try and build that muscle memory. Your job is pretty hard as a developer, so you might as well learn the bits of your tools that will make it easier, whether it's your IDE or whether it's an AI tool or whatever it is. And the last thought I want to leave you with is, the pleasure in thinking and doing things well is such a deep-wired human pleasure, and it feels to me diluted when it's linked to productivity. So the talk is about productivity, sure, but I don't want us to get so focused on producing, on being productive. I want us to focus a bit more on this flow, on enjoying the job. And some of these productivity tools can help do the boring stuff so that we can enjoy the less boring stuff, the stuff that we enjoy doing. So with that, all I have to say is thank you very much. If you want more information, the black QR code is links to all the resources. The purple QR code is a chance to win the book about IntelliJ IDEA. Thank you very much.